If you've read anything about the topic of introversion versus extroversion, you've probably heard that introverts don't like small talk. And I wanted to talk a little bit about that today because that's actually not always true. I'm Karen Dudek-Brannan, and I help pediatric therapists become better leaders so that they can make a bigger impact with their services. And so that's why I wanted to talk about this, because a lot of therapists that I know are actually very introverted. And when you're in a therapy field, you are in a field where you're talking to a lot of different people. There's all kinds of things that you have to do, whether it's one-on-one with clients, whether it is doing trainings to share your work, whether it's networking, doing all kinds of meetings. There's a lot of talking and engaging with other people. And I know that a lot of the other introverts that I know who are therapists or maybe they're teachers find some of the things that they have to do kind of draining, and it can be kind of hard to figure out how to navigate. And if you're an extrovert who works with a lot of introverts, sometimes it can be easy to misinterpret their behavior or misunderstand it. Or I know that there's some people who don't know if they're an introvert or an extrovert, and they just know that they're really burnt out and they're not really sure why. So I think diving into these topics can be really helpful. So today I wanted to talk about that myth, I guess I would say, that introverts don't like small talk. So obviously this is my perspective and my interpretation of this as someone who is very introverted. So I'm going to explain how it is for me. I don't know that this is how it is for all introverts, but this is one way of looking at things and one way of understanding it. So obviously there is this idea that introverts hate small talk, just again, like the kind of normal, like, hey, how is your day? How are you doing? How's the weather kind of a thing. And that they just can't stand it, especially when it's some kind of a networking event where you're mingling and you're kind of popping around to a lot of people, or whether it's just a casual party or something like that. And for me specifically, it's not the small talk that I hate. It's more about authenticity. So I don't like situations where I feel like I'm posturing or I'm fake, or we're just kind of saying things and going through the motion. So one example is, when somebody says something like, hey, how are you? A lot of times they don't actually really want to know how you are. They're just saying that out of habit. They're just saying, hey, how are you? And you're supposed to say, I'm fine. How are you? Well, you know what? There's some days when I actually really want to talk to somebody and go deep. And I actually want to tell them how I really am. And I know that in the past, somebody asked me how I am, and I answer that honestly, and I launch into something that's been going on, and then they're looking at me weird, and it's like, whoa, you're oversharing and all of this. But I really actually wanted to talk to somebody about something that's been going on. And so when they say, how are you? I'm like, well, actually, things have been kind of crazy today, blah, 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 whatever. So I've actually gotten into the habit of just saying, I'm fine, how are you? And not talking about all of those things. And then over time, that starts to feel inauthentic. And then I actually avoid situations where I know I'm going to have that conversation, because I know I'm going to be doing something that feels like lying to me. Even though I understand, it's social nuance, it's not meant to be taken literally and all of those things. So that's why I don't like small talk, or it's not the small talk that I don't like. It's when I feel like we're being fake, because sometimes when you are having small talk, it's like, it's a segue, it's an icebreaker. You have to get through that part to get to the real deep connection and conversation. And that's the part that I like. And that is really the part that a lot of introverted people like. I'm sure extroverted people like that as well. But I would say that I think that in my understanding of things, because introversion and extroversion is more about where you derive energy. It's not a matter of like, do I like being around people? Do I not like being around people? It's just that introverts often want to recharge by themselves, whereas extroverts, they get energy from other people and social interactions. So that actually is a recharging activity for them, whereas it is more of an energy depleting activity for somebody who's introverted. They need to kind of, even if they're enjoying the social situation, they might want to go recharge and regroup by themselves. So that would be how I am. And so with that particular scenario, I think that extroverts probably just have a higher tolerance for those conversations where I wouldn't say it's lying. I'm not saying that that's an accurate interpretation. When I say I feel like I'm being fake, maybe that's not exactly true, even though that's how I'm feeling. So I think that extroverts might have a higher tolerance for those things where it's like, we're just sort of like BSing a little bit over here, and maybe they don't mind it as much. And it's fine because they like being around people. They're just maybe not as picky about how those interactions are. Whereas me as an introvert, um, I'm just a little more, I'm just a little pickier about the way that I interact with people. And so that means that I might avoid certain things. But the problem with that for me personally is that sometimes I avoid the things that are going to get me to the things that I like doing, because you sometimes do have to make small talk and banter, and you have to tolerate some of those, you know, what I sometimes interpret as like kind of BS conversations to get to the good stuff. So it's kind of a catch-22. And as an introvert, sometimes I avoid the thing that's going to get me to the thing that I actually want, which is not always the greatest. So if you're an introvert, it would be interesting for you to reflect on that and think, do I really hate small talk, or do I just like to be authentic? Am I just a little bit more nuanced in the way that I like to interact with people? And am I avoiding situations that are actually things that I might like doing just because I see this thing that's like a hoop I need to jump through? Whereas in actuality, it might not be that bad. So that would be something that I would be curious, that I would encourage you, if you are an introvert and you feel like, oh my gosh, this social situation, it's so overwhelming. Maybe that's what it is. And if that's the case, then I do think that you can, it can help you to tease out the situations where it's not the small talk that's bothering you. Maybe it's just the authenticity, because there are situations where I think that it does make sense to avoid them. Like when you're at an event with somebody and you're in a conversation, and you can tell that the person is looking over your shoulder or kind of looking around for somebody more interesting to talk to. Yeah, I mean, maybe you do want to avoid those types of situations and people, if you know that you have people that you interact with that tend to do that. So I think that coming at it with this lens can make it a little bit easier for you to tease out when it might be a good idea to just suck it up and get out there versus just avoiding it. And I think that this is really important, not just for social interactions, but for professional types of things that actually can move your career forward, help you to build relationships with people that you work with. If you work in a school or whatever setting you work with, it's like, do you choose to eat lunch by yourself because you don't want to avoid, or you don't want to deal with the lunchroom gossip or deal with conversations that are draining to you? Or, maybe you do find somebody to eat lunch with, because it is good to have some kind of a collaboration at lunch. I used to do, I like to, when I'm interacting with people, I like it to have a purpose. That's part of the authenticity piece for me. So if we're not, let me rephrase this. If it's at work, I always liked to feel like I was using my time wisely. So sometimes I would do a lunch meeting with somebody where we'd eat lunch together, and then we'd also collaborate on some specific cases. Time is always an issue for a therapist. So we would be able to catch up a little bit and socialize a little bit and talk and have a conversation and build some connection between colleagues, but also at the same time we're getting something done. I like to get things done. I'm kind of all business like that. And so when you have those conversations, it does give you a chance to also have some connection and talk about some other things besides the professional things. So that is kind of a nice thing to do to maybe help you to look forward to your job a little bit more. Obviously, if you like the people that you work with and you have relationships there, it's going to be more enjoyable. Now, obviously, you don't always have to be getting things done literally when you're having those conversations. There are times when you're just being together to be together, and that is a purpose as well. But I think that just thinking about it like this, thinking about it with purpose, where it's, am I really connecting with this person, or is it just not, is it not really doing anything for me? Is this relationship serving me, kind of a thing? So I always ask myself those questions, because there are many times where I avoid situations that do have purpose. So I would encourage you to do the same thing. If you are a therapist, teacher, or anybody who works in a setting where you've got to be collaborating with a lot of people, which is most work settings, obviously. So curious your thoughts. I am going to be talking about some other introvert myths in the coming days. So stay tuned for that. Definitely keep your eyes on your feed. And then, you're also welcome to follow me on my Facebook page, Dr. Karen Speech and Language, or Dr. Karen Dudek-Brannan. I will be going live on those channels on topics like